The GrooveTube's GT-55 and Sterling ST-55 are nearly identical microphones that have a unique capsule with a 3-micron diaphragm and a disc resonator that boosts the high-frequency response. MicParts has come up with a circuit replacement for this microphone that lowers the noise, increases the sensitivity, and gives the mic a unique vibe with a custom wound transformer. We're going to build that mod today in the Studio Mic Zone. So today we're going to do an overview of the MicParts mod for the Sterling ST-55 microphone, but this is just to give you an idea of how the mod goes and what's involved. Assemble your tools, get your workspace cleared up. I have a little plastic box I use. You can use a dish or whatever to put the components in so they don't go rolling all over the table and onto the floor. And the first thing is really to read the manual. And they recommend that you read the manual all the way through so you know how the process is going to go. And so there's no surprises with maybe a tool you didn't have or something you didn't know about. So in the beginning of the manual, there's a bill of materials. It shows the components. And in case you don't know what the components look like, this will tell you. On the next page, it gives the recommended tools and the setup for your work area. And then, of course, the instructions. Now, I'm an old guy, and my electronic experience goes back a lot of years. And I've built an awful lot of Heathkits when I was younger. And Heathkit was known for their wonderful manuals, but the MicParts manual kind of blows those away. So it's step by step. Everything is shown, and it's pretty easy if you can follow instructions to build a good microphone. So, read the manual through first, get your workplace set up, and then we're ready to go. We're going to open the first bag of components and get ready to build. Okay, we have the resistors out. Now we're getting ready to do the assembly of the board. One other thing I would recommend, at least if you're over 40, you're probably going to have a little problem reading the small numbers on the resistors. So you're going to need something like a magnifying glass or some kind of magnifier. What I do, I have a pair of high power reading glasses that I just put on when I need to look at a resistor or a part, and then I can just take them off, which works real good for me. The first thing is we're going to bend the leads on the resistors, but the marking should be up so that if you have to troubleshoot the circuit later, you know exactly what value is where, and you can verify that you got the right one in the right place. So we're going to bend the leads on these resistors so that they fit in the board, and then we're going to install 6 resistors. Okay, once you have the resistors installed, you want to compare with the picture in the manual, make sure you have them installed correctly. Once you've confirmed that all the resistors are in the correct place, solder them into position carefully. Okay, when you're done soldering, you want to clip the leads on the bottom of the board. Clip them as close as you can to the board. The next step is to insert the Zener diode in the board. And if you can see it here, the one end, it's very small, has a black band around it. And you want to line that black band up with the white mark on the circuit board. If you put it in backwards, the circuit's not going to work. So we'll insert that correctly. And we're going to solder and trim both leads. So at this point, we're going to insert the remaining 3 resistors and 2 capacitors following the instructions in the manual soldering and then trimming the leads just as we've done on all the others. Resistor R3 is in a bag with the JFET, and if there's more than one resistor in the bag, use the one whose value is written on that little slip of paper that you can see here. This will optimize the performance of the JFET. So again, bend the lead on that and insert it as shown in the instruction manual. It might be easier if you soldered the vertical resistors from the bottom of the board. It's pretty hard to get the iron under the big end of that. So I would solder those from the bottom of the board. The next operation is to insert the Teflon pins in the board. So take one of the pins and put it in the hole labeled BP. And if you have an external pad switch on your microphone, you want to take the other one and put it in the hole near capacitor C9, like that. And then to seat them, take the board, invert it, and press it down on a hard object to seat the pins. And this will take some force. You want to make sure that they are seated all the way. And they are. Then you want to clean both ends of the pins with some flux cleaner or 99% isopropyl alcohol. The next step is, if the microphone has an external pad switch, we are going to install the 15 puff capacitor on the board. If you don't have that external switch, you can skip this step and go to the next page. So we're going to bend the lead and one of the leads at 90 degrees. Insert the other lead through the board and wrap the 90-degree bent lead around the terminal. I'm going to clip off the excess length. And then we're going to solder the terminal. And then solder the capacitor's other lead from the bottom of the board and clip off the excess. I'm going to want to remove the FET from the bag that it came in. And then we're going to scrub the leads with, again, some flux remover or isopropyl alcohol. Okay, make sure the flat side of the FET is facing you, and then bend the bottom lead as shown in the diagram in the manual. Insert the two leads that are left sticking out into the holes. Make sure the flat side is facing R1. Solder the two leads from the bottom of the board, and then we're going to want to bend lead number 3 around the pin. And then cut off the excess. Don't solder that yet. The remaining resistor is a 1 gig resistor designated as R2, and you want to form the lead like this, roughly, as shown in the instruction manual. And then we're going to insert that into the R2 hole. And wrap the lead around the post, but don't solder it yet. Then solder the bottom of R2 in place and trim the lead. So now we're going to install the 3 electrolytic capacitors. The smaller of the 3 is the 47 microfarad capacitor, and that is C3. Putting the longer lead in the positive hole, Put it down, make sure it's seated firmly against the board. If you don't seat them properly, the mic body may not be able to fit over the board. So follow the instructions carefully in the manual. You're going to want to solder one lead first and then make sure that everything is seated before you finish soldering. And then double check the orientation as shown in the manual. Then you're going to solder and clip all leads. If your donor microphone has an external high-pass filter switch, you're going to want to install the 0.22 microfarad capacitor at C1. So if you have that switch, install it, solder it in, and clip the leads. If you're not installing the capacitor, you need to install a jumper wire as pictured in the manual. So if you don't have the external high-pass filter switch, install the jumper as shown in the manual. Okay, we're going to install capacitors C6 and C10 from the bottom of the board. And we're going to hold those in place temporarily while we solder them with some painter's tape. Again, make sure the capacitors are fitting tight against the board so you don't run into any problems with fit. To do that, flip it over, and you want to solder carefully so that you don't burn any of the other components that are already installed on the side of the board. And then carefully clip the leads. Now's the time to clean the flux off the board with some commercial flux remover. I use the E-line flux remover. And we're going to clean both sides of the board. Give the board a good visual inspection when you're done and make sure that all traces of flux have been removed and all stickiness, because that can affect the operation of the circuit over long term because of the high impedance circuit. Final step is to install the sonic cap on the back side of the board, and the orientation isn't important because it's a non-polar capacitor. So I'm going to insert that into the holes. Solder it in. And then we'll trim the leads. Use some flux remover again and clean around the solder joints on both sides. Finally, you want to give the board a good visual inspection on both sides. Make sure that all your solder connections are good and that there's no damaged components anywhere on the board. And that's it for the board part. Okay, the circuit board is completed, and now it's time to work on the installation into the donor microphone. In this case, our donor microphone is a Sterling Audio ST-55. If you have a Groove Tubes GT-55, the installation will be almost exactly the same. So the first thing we want to do is open the mic up. We'll screw the bottom bolt off, put that aside, and pull the body off. And therefore we're exposing two circuit boards, and we are going to want to remove both of these boards and unsolder them. So that's 4 screws on the top board. take the bottom board off. Okay, the bottom board lifts up a bit easier, and pull that out a bit and unsolder each of the wires. Now that the bottom board's unsoldered, you can work on the top. You don't want to rip any wires loose. We'll take the two bottom wires off first. And then carefully remove the top wires, because these are going to have to go back on. Okay, so now we have the ST-55 mic body with the two boards removed. We can set these aside and maybe use them for replacement or for spare parts later on. Next, we want to remove the transformer shield and the bottom connector. And definitely hang on to these screws because we're going to be putting them back later. I'm going to set those in this tray lid here, since we're going to be using them again. Okay, there's the last screw. And that allows us to remove the bottom connector, the transformer, and the transformer shield. It's recommended to remove the wiring from the XLR connector, so we're going to do that also. Just be aware this is going to take a little more heat than the connections on the PC board. I'm just going to clip these transformer leads. And then we're going to slip off the heat shrink tubing so we can get at the connector. And we'll unsolder the last two here. Okay, so we've got a clean connector here. Be aware that there is a jumper right here between pin 1 and the ground connector, and you want to leave that in place. The next step is to enlarge one of the holes in the transformer shield. And they recommend that you can do this with a 5/32 to 3/16 inch drill bit, and then polish it up with a Dremel tool. I'm going to use a Dremel tool, since I have one handy, to enlarge that hole. And there we go. We have a nice smooth enlarged hole in there. It did work with the Dremel. It probably would have been a little bit easier to drill it, and it did trash the bit. So you want to make that hole bigger, either a metal reamer or a drill bit is probably the easier way to go, and then finish it off to polish it up with the Dremel tool. Okay, using the 3 wires, the red, white, and black, included in the kit, I am going to wire the new wires to the XLR pins to replace the wires we removed. So we'll start with the black one. Remember, you're going to need a bit more heat on these pins than you would on a PC board. Okay, the wiring's all installed, and now we're going to install a piece of shrink tubing over the red and white wires, just to protect it from any potential shorting. Slip that down. And we'll give it a blast of heat and shrink it. Okay, we hit it with the heat gun and the tubing is now shrunk. And as one little last thing here, I am going to put a piece of blue tape, blue painter's tape, on the end of each of the wires, just so that it'll be easier to distinguish the XLR wiring from the transformer wiring, which does have the same colors. Make our life easier. So there we go. Just to make reassembly easier, I'm going to trim these little tags we put on the XLR connectors, and that'll make it easier to get them through the hole in the transformer shield. So first we want to take a transformer shield and route the XLR wires through it. A little piece of tape there. And then we'll route the 4 wires from our transformer through the same hole. And it'd probably be easier if we twisted the ends of these wires a bit so they didn't get hung up on the edge of the hole. Okay, now we can route these through the same hole as the other wires. Okay, and then we want to pull the transformer into the shield. Get that to sit in there nicely. Tighten up the wires. And we're good. Okay, so we want to orient the shield with pin 3 facing away, and we want to orient the shield so that it's at the back of the connector housing. Okay, so we want to put it back together. I'm going to put the wires towards the rear of the microphone. Okay, so we have the wires at the rear of the microphone. This is the front with the switches. Wires are at the rear, and we've got the holes lined up. And now we will put it back together. We use the screws that we pulled out before. They have this set of reverse tweezers that as you squeeze them, it opens, and let go, it closes. And I find these really handy for handling screws and small parts. Getting this last screw into the transformer shield sometimes is a little tough, so it might be good not to tighten all the screws up until you get everything in. I'd leave the screws on the other side a little bit loose until you get that last screw in. And just go back and give everything a good tightening. Now we're ready to mount the PC board back in the mic. And use the screws that you used during disassembly. Same screws that mounted the old board. And again, I think we're better off leaving the screws a little bit loose until you get all 4 of them in. Okay, now that all 4 screws are in, just give each one another portion of a turn to get it tight. And our PC board is now mounted. All we have to do is wire it up. Okay, it's time to wire up the pins along the bottom of the board, and we're going to start again by following the instructions in the manual. And we're going to start with the pink wire. Now these are going to be a bit too long, so what I'm going to do is cut the wire. And I'm going to strip maybe a little bit over 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to tin it. And then using a pair of long-nose pliers, insert it through the hole, hopefully. And then solder it from the other side. So, do the same with each of the wires, following the instructions in the book. Okay, we've got the bottom wiring all done, and now it's time to work on the wiring from the top. There are 5 wires coming from the switch on the ST-55, and we want those facing the back side of the board. There's 2 wires coming from the capsule. In this case, there's a green and a white wire, and you need to verify if you have a different microphone which is which. In the case of at least the 55 I have here, the green wire is coming from the center of the capsule, and the white wire is coming from the outside of the capsule. So we want those on the front side of the board, and we'll wire those up next. These wires are a little bit damaged. I'm going to trim them back and restrip them a little bit just to get a little cleaner job. Okay, the green wire is going to the, I guess you can see it, the pad there called FD. We'll wire the green wire to that. And the white wire will go to the Teflon connector that has the wire from the FET and the resistor going to it. So you're going to have to wrap that and solder carefully so that you don't damage the FET from overheating it. Okay, we've got both of these joints soldered now, and we'll just go in there with a Q-tip with some flux remover and clean the joints up really well. These are the critical joints because they're very high impedance, so anything that could cause some leakage could affect the performance of the microphone. So give them a good cleaning with the flux remover. Okay, next we are going to solder the green, blue, and the yellow wires that come from the high-pass filter switch to the circuit board. So just follow the wiring diagram in the instruction manual. Okay, the blue, green, and yellow wires are now soldered to the board from the high-pass filter. These were probably the trickiest to solder, so take your time with it. You want to insert the wire from this side and solder from the back. It's a little tricky, but if you get that done, that's probably the toughest part of the construction. The next thing we're going to do is solder the orange and white wires to the 2 pins, according to the instructions in the manual. And you may want to just trim a little bit off of those if they're too long, and re-tin the ends. Okay, so there we are. We got the 2 pad wires connected to the pins. Everything is hooked up and ready to test. We're going to give the board another cleaning with the flux remover, and we'll be ready to put it back into the case and test the microphone. We've got the mic back in its case, and I've got it hooked up to phantom power and into the mixing board, and as you can hear, it is working. So we're going to do one final thing, and that's to test the switches on the microphone. There goes the 10 dB pad, and you can hear that the level is dropped off, so that appears to be working. And we'll just try the high-pass filter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that's working also. So we've got a couple little things to finish up here, and we'll be totally done. So one thing I like to do when I finish the build or a repair job on a mic is put some thread locker on the screws. Don't need to put a lot on there, but just enough to hold that screw in place so that it doesn't vibrate loose after a bunch of use. Clean off the excess, and we'll bundle it up. Another new mic for the mic locker. And finally, anytime I do a mic mod or build, I put a P-Touch label on the mic with my logo and detailing what has been done to the microphone, so that when I go to the mic locker, it's a lot easier to find the mic that I'm looking for, and I know exactly what's been done to it. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. You can find other videos like this and other microphone and studio resources at our website, StudioMicZone.com. This video is copyright 2017 by Norwest Communications Incorporated.